Violent clashes between Ugandan security forces and protesters have left 16 people dead in the capital, Kampala. The protest came after opposition presidential candidate Robert Kyagulanyi, popularly known as Bobi Wine, was arrested during a campaign rally.
According to the Red Cross, more than 40 people were injured. Among the injured, 11 were treated for gunshot wounds following scuffles between police and protesters. Police say the cause of the deaths and nature of the injuries is being investigated. Bobi Wine, a musician turned opposition leader, was arrested for violating coronavirus measures at his rallies. This after the Electoral Commission urged candidates to use non-contact campaigns and media to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Wine has in the past faced escalating police harassment since announcing his intention to challenge President Musevenis, who seized power at the head of a rebel army in 1986. The popular singer, whose music advocates for social justice, poverty and corruption, has continued to shake the ruling party. Meanwhile, opposition presidential candidates have suspended their campaigns and called for fellow contestants to be released. Wine, who is currently in police custody, has not been charged.
To get a sense of what's been unfolding on the ground and what's moving forward, we now joined via Zoom by independent analyst Dr. Frederick Golooba-Mutebi from Kampala in Uganda. Thanks so much indeed for joining us, and good to talk to you again.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. It's good to be back on the show.
16 people dead is the report that we've just had. What does it say about the situation in Uganda?
Well, clearly, this particular presidential campaign is not any different from previous ones we have had. Now, during previous ones, they may not have killed 16 people on the streets, but the ground for campaigning in Uganda has never been level for as long as President Musevenis has been in power and contesting to be re-elected. Now, what happened and what has been happening previously is that the government engages in acts of harassment against opposition leaders, particularly those who are perceived to be popular and attracting large crowds. Now, this time around, of course, as you would have heard, Robert Kyagulanyi was arrested, apparently, because he has been encouraging his supporters to gather in large numbers at his rallies, and therefore putting them in danger of contracting the coronavirus. But this is nothing new. Kizza Besigye, who was contesting in previous years, was treated precisely the same way. There was no corona at the time. So this whole thing of corona is an excuse that the government is using to take advantage of the situation to cripple the campaign of an opposition leader who is perceived to be popular and therefore, well, fairly threatening to President Musevenis' hold on power. Having said that, his supporters are not the only ones that have been gathering in large numbers and putting themselves at risk. We all understand and agree there is this danger of coronavirus in this country as elsewhere. But President Musevenis' own supporters have been gathering in towns up and down the country. Wherever he's traveling, they gather on the roadsides in large numbers. They cheer him. We haven't seen them being tear-gassed by the police or even dispersed. President Musevenis' supporters in his own political party have been going up and down the country, convening large meetings, people gathering in large crowds, wearing yellow T-shirts, the color of his party. These have never been dispersed by the police or even tear-gassed. So the whole idea that Kyagulanyi was arrested because his supporters were at the risk of spreading the coronavirus is actually quite a lame excuse.
Why has President Musevenis' government been allowed to get away with this kind of abuse of authority?
Well, it depends on what you mean by that. President Museveni, as any other African leader who is intent on holding on to power regardless, is pretty much a law unto himself. He's the president in this country, and he's therefore able to do whatever he likes. I don't see that anyone is capable of stopping him, not internally, not externally. And it seems as though this time round, contrary to what has happened in the past, development partners in this country have kept very quiet. Human rights organizations, with the exception of Human Rights Watch, have kept silent. The churches in this country and other religious bodies have kept silent. Surprisingly, even the Law Society and other civil society groups are quite deafeningly silent. That is baffling, but clearly I don't think that even if they express their views, that they're in position to stop President Museveni from doing what he wants to do.
The use of live ammunition on civilians, I mean, anywhere in the world, this would be discussed at the UN Security Council. I mean, that's how serious that is, where authorities would kill citizens.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right in that. And this is why it's surprising a lot of observers as to why people who should be speaking up, organizations that should be speaking up and trying to call the government here to order, are keeping quiet. But also we have seen a development that is really quite striking in that it's not just uniformed security personnel, the police and the army, who are shooting at civilians, even people in civilian clothes. Now, we don't know whether these are thugs, whether these are criminals, or whether these are elements of the security forces. We have seen many, many video clips of people dressed normally like any other civilian, holding assault rifles and going around shooting at buildings and shooting in the air and targeting civilians. Now, this raises a question as to how we members of the public are supposed to distinguish between bona fide members of the security forces and thugs who might be taking the law into their own hands. The question is, why are the security forces not arresting these people who are wearing civilian clothes and carrying assault weapons? If they are members of the security forces, why are they not in their regular uniforms? Why are they dressed anyhow in ways that are going to be confusing? I mean, ordinary criminals could take advantage of the situation and commit acts of murder and robbery, perhaps. And we will never know whether these are soldiers, police officers, or just ordinary criminals.
The president talks about people being used by outsiders. Does he genuinely believe that, or is it just something that he says to justify his clampdown on any sort of voice against him?
Well, the president and whoever else he is working with may have information that the rest of us don't have, that they're outsiders who are influencing these things. The question is, why are they so intent on keeping these outsiders secret? It would be very helpful for those of us who are observing to be told that outsider X or Y or Z is the one that is encouraging these acts of hooliganism, as they call them. But the more they claim that there are outside influences making these things happen, the less they are willing to reveal who these outsiders are. So we really don't know the truth of these claims.
Doesn't the East African community have protocols on elections, intimidation, the free and fairness of campaigning, and literally the extrajudicial killings that are taking place?
I think they do. And indeed, there is such a thing as values that we all in East Africa would like to claim that we respect and hold dear when it comes to exercises like this. But the East African community has been virtually dormant for some time now. Many of their ordinary processes are not happening because they have no money, because governments are distracted by all kinds of things. You may know about the tensions that have been going on between Rwanda and Uganda, and these seem to have also contributed somewhat to the paralysis that we see in the East African community. So we are not expecting any action from that vote at all.
What do you think may happen? I mean, you know, we're looking at Nigeria, where it seemed to have been just about SARS, but it was quite clear eventually that it was all about general governance and a lot of issues that Nigerians were fed up of. Is there not a danger that this kind of force, persistent force, is just going to cause some kind of eruption, mass protests that perhaps they might not be able to control eventually?
Well, that's entirely possible. I wouldn't say that it's the violence that is going to cause mass eruption. I think that after the president has been in power for more than 30 years, there will be fairly significant numbers of citizens who are fed up of seeing the same person in power. There are people who want change for the sake of change. There are people who want change for all kinds of reasons. Now, these people are going to keep trying to assert themselves, to make themselves heard. And actually, some of the force that we see being used is intended to keep these people down, to make sure that they don't rise up. But as to whether this is going to be, whether the government is going to be successful in its attempt to suppress these uprisings, we don't know. But it seems as if there are clear indications of people who are determined to make themselves heard. I just saw a clip just before I came onto air of a young man who was shot. He was removing his shirt. You could clearly see the bullet wound on his back. And people were telling him to avoid going into crowded places, and he was being very adamant that he doesn't care anymore. If he dies, he will die for the benefit of those who will gain from the results of the actions that he and his friends are engaged in. So I think that temporarily the government might succeed in keeping people down, but as to the long-term effectiveness of these measures, we really don't know. We stand to see what happens along the way. But clearly there are many Ugandans who are totally fed up, want change, and I'm not sure for the long term that the government will be able to suppress them.
One can't help but draw comparisons with ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe, where you have a ruling party that rules for a long time, and the leader is a dominant personality, and that for the longest time one can't imagine ZANU-PF without Robert Mugabe, the NRM without Yoweri Museveni. However, there was a time in Zimbabwe where Robert Mugabe was ousted. Is there an appetite from people within NRM to start thinking of perhaps taking action?
I think the one thing that we need to bear in mind is that the NRM is not a political organization in the sense that we know organizations like ZANU-PF or the ANC or CCM in Tanzania are. The NRM is a political party only in theory. Actually, on the ground, it doesn't exist outside of electoral periods. The NRM doesn't have many functional branches across this country. The NRM doesn't have functioning organs as stipulated in their own constitution. So the NRM is a political organization that exists only or functions only when President Museveni wants it to. And that raises questions as to what it will be like after he's gone. I think that whoever takes over the shell of this so-called political party is going to have to build it from scratch. It really doesn't exist. It's not a coherent political organization that can mobilize itself to tackle a leader that they might think has exceeded his limits. That's
so it's a one-man show, literally.
Yeah, it's pretty much a party that rotates around President Museveni as an individual. And once he's gone, I'm not sure that it's going to continue to survive for very long, unless it's taken over by somebody with really great capacity for organizational building and reorganization.
All right, Professor Golooba-Mutebi, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much indeed for your insights this evening. And yeah, let's hope that some kind of progress is made on the ground there. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Peter.
All right.